Okay, so welcome everyone. So my name is Pet and I'm one half of Dandelion Learning. All our contact details are here on this slide. So if after the session you think, oh, I wish I'd asked that, then just drop me an email. We're on social media. So if you are on Twitter or Facebook or Instagram, then do drop us a follow. And our email address is here as well as our website address too. So we've got lots of free training running at the moment for teachers, teaching assistants, and for leaders. My colleague Tree, she has just run a session, an autumn update for English leaders. And so if you didn't come to that, if you would like that sent to you, then just drop me an email and I'll make sure I send you the link for the recording of that session. So we're looking this afternoon at grammar for school leaders. So this session, we're going to be looking at best practice in the teaching of grammar. So what does effective teaching of grammar look like? There's been quite a lot of research into the teaching of grammar by Exeter University, and we're going to unpick that research evidence. We're going to just look at a few bits and pieces in terms of grammar terminology and subject knowledge, because there have been so many changes over recent years. So I'm just going to unpick some of the things that I see when I go into schools. So just picking up on some issues with regards to terminology. And I'm also going to signpost you to materials to support school self-evaluation. So to continue the conversation really with everyone else back at school. So we're going to start off just looking at important principles. So rooted in speaking and listening. Now we know that the natural way in which we learn language is initially through spoken language models. So that's why children who engage in extended talk from a really early age tend to have better sentence construction and a richer vocabulary. And as schools, that's just about making sure that everyone recognises how important spoken language is. So as leaders, it's about communicating that to all our teachers and teaching assistants, but also to our parents. We know that if they can't say it, they can't write it. So if we want our children to be able to write because sentences, while sentences, when sentences, if sentences, so what the government call those multi-clause sentence constructions, if we want them to be able to write those by the end of year 2, which we do if we are using that assessment at expected level in writing, then we need them to be talking those sorts of constructs, and we need them to be talking those actually in reception. So it's about our reception teachers and nursery school teachers layering talk with the sorts of constructions that we want them to be able to write in year 2. It's about that whole school approach. It's really, really important. So we know that where there's a focus on spoken language in the early years, and a real sharp focus. So thinking about, well, what is it that these children need to be able to do by the end of Key Stage 1? Now, how do I model that in spoken language and give them opportunities to develop that in spoken language? And similarly at Key Stage 2, we know that we want our children to be able to write using fronted adverbials, for example, effortlessly by the end of Key Stage 2, to build suspense, for example, at the end of Key Stage 2. So in that case, we need to make sure that we are modelling the use of fronted adverbials in our day-to-day talk with the children really early on, so that it comes out naturally in their writing, essentially. Because we know, of course, that children who read avidly too are our better writers. So they have a better grasp of grammar because they've soaked up those patterns, those syntactical patterns. So the other aspect for us as schools is to make sure that our read aloud is very, very embedded, so that in every single classroom, every single day, there is a fabulous read aloud where the teacher is sharing fabulous language with the children. So that's absolutely imperative. So immersing children in beautiful language through read aloud. As I say, we know that our best writers are avid readers, and those children who have soaked up the patterns of language, they can write beautiful sentences, putting the subordinate clause first to vary their sentence construction. They use their fronted adverbials to build tension and to hide the action from the reader. And they can do that because they have those patterns in their bellies and in their bones from regular exposure to fabulous language. So it's in books that children are naturally exposed to a broad range of language structures and constructs and vocabulary that we don't necessarily use in everyday talk. So if we want our children to write with constructs like, long, long ago in a distant valley, there lived an angry troll. Lovely, two-fronted adverbial phrases there. If we want them to write like that, then we need to make sure that we're exposing them to that sort of language through our read aloud every single day. I love this quote from Mark Forsyth, The Elements of Eloquence. It comes from this book, and it was in a BBC article a couple of years ago. I think it really sums up the impact of reading on grammar and understanding of language. He says, adjectives in English absolutely have to be in this order: opinion, size, age, shape, colour, origin, material, purpose, noun. So you can have a lovely little old rectangular green French silver whittling knife. But if you mess with that word order in the slightest, you'll sound like a maniac. It's an odd thing that every speaker uses that list, but almost none of us could write it out. Could you guys write it out? Did you know that order of adjectives? No. And most people don't. But actually, we can write like that naturally because we've soaked it up. You know, we've learnt that word order by osmosis. And so we need to make sure, particularly for those children who are not read to at home, we need to ensure that that read aloud happens on a daily basis. And in the early stages, nursery, reception, year one, that we're doing more than one read aloud every single day. Because what children learn from being read to is priceless. It's about immersing them in language, but it's also about a whole host of other things, isn't it? When we really engage children in that exposure to story, we learn about how the world works. We learn how, puts really young children into positions that they've not been in their own lives. And it helps them think about, well, how would I behave? What would I feel like if I was that character? And how, so it's really, really important for a whole host of reasons. So read aloud, really important. Spoken language, really important. And that focus on spoken language. The other thing as leaders to be aware of is this business of consistency in terminology. Now, of course, that varies in terms of, how important the SPAG tests are to you as a school. But even if you're not particularly concerned with the SPAG test, actually having consistency in terminology is really helpful for children. So we're looking at that whole school approach in terms of grammar. We're not calling something connectives in year one and then conjunctions in year two. We're not calling them connectives, we're not switching. We've got that consistent approach. It's a terminology so that children understand what we mean when we say, could you add a fronted adverbial here to delay the action for the reader? Could you pop one in there to say how he was feeling? So they know what you mean essentially. So consistency in terminology, but also precise definitions with plenty of examples. So precise definitions, what I mean by that is, for example, what traditionally how do we define adjectives to our primary school children? Traditionally, what do we say adjectives are? You can unmute yourselves, or what do you think? What did I learn adjectives are in the 70s? What was I told?
Describing word.
Thank you. Absolutely. A describing word. That's absolutely right. That's definitely. And I've used that myself in the classroom. But actually, there are loads of other words in other word classes which are very descriptive. Think about verbs like swooped and flickered and glistened. They are describing words, but they're verbs. So we need to be really precise. If we're using definitions, be precise. So, the adjective describes the noun or the pronoun. That's its job that it does in the sentence. And I would always talk to children about function. So we need to have this conversation with our children about, well, what job is it doing in the sentence? What's its function? What's its job? Because the words classification changes depending on where it is in the sentence and what job it's doing in the sentence. So this little cartoon here, for example, push, pull, lift. Lift, of course, in one context could be a noun, the lift, but of course it could also be a verb, to lift. So context is really important. Precision is important, but also context is important. So here's our adjectives. So this is something that I think is really key. So of course our children need to know the term adjectives. Adjectives, they describe a noun or a pronoun, but looking at where they come in a sentence can really help our children. So they're normally placed before the words they qualify. So for example, shy child, so snuggled up to the noun, I say to the children. So adjectives are often snuggled up to the noun. So shy child, blue notebook, rotten apple, or they can be linked to the noun by that verb to be. So the verb to be here in the past tense was, the jumper was enormous. So the job that it's doing, enormous, is it's describing the noun, the jumper. So helping the children to see the position of the word in the sentence and you know, where it tends to come in the sentence can really help them too. The other, when we're thinking about precision of terminology, are verbs. And this is something that again and again our children fall down on because they miss really easy marks on SPAG tests because they've been told that a verb is a what? What's a verb, guys? What's the traditional definition? It's a
Doing word or an action word.
Yeah, thank you. It's a doing word, absolutely. So a doing word or an action word. And of course, many words, verbs, don't seem to be doing anything. The most common verb of all is the verb to be. And in all its various forms, the verb to be isn't doing anything at all. It just is. So we need to really explore that with the children. If I asked your children to underline the verbs in these sentences, there are some that would commonly trip them up. So the film was exciting. Quite often they see the word exciting and they think, oh, that's the verb because it's an ing ending. But actually that word, of course, is our adjective. So it's the past tense of the verb to be. So was. I wore my new swimming cap. Guess what they underline there? They all underline swimming. Because they think, oh, that's the doing word. We're doing something here. So we need them to recognize that swimming, the job that it's doing there, it's actually describing the noun cap. So the verb is snuggled up to that pronoun there, I wore, so the past tense of to wear. And similarly, the walk to my house is long. They quite often underline walk as the verb, but of course we want them to recognize is as the verb, and walk is the noun in that case. And these are very similar examples that the sorts of things that used to come up at the end of Key Stage 1 in SPAG tests, grammar tests that I see in schools. At the end of Key Stage 1, they had an example, which was for our 7-year-olds to underline the verb in the sentence, I wore my new running shoes. And of course, the majority of our children actually underlined running in that example. So very similar to the number 2 example there. So we need to be precise. So verbs, yes, they can be doing words, being words. They show what's happening or the situation in the sentence. So just the precision in terms of you know, definitions is helpful, but also lots and lots of examples for our children. So we're collecting those examples together. The other aspect that I see a lot in terms of terminology are conjunctions being confused. And of course, there are 2 types of conjunctions in our current national curriculum. We've got coordinating conjunctions and subordinating conjunctions. And coordinating conjunctions, for the purpose of our national curriculum and our current testing regime, our coordinating conjunctions are the 3 words and, but, and, or. And, but, and, or are coordinating conjunctions. So I've still come across the acronym fanboys in some schools, and it's not terribly helpful. So fanboys stands for and, nor, fan, boys, but, or, yet, so, fanboys. Now, so is a subordinating conjunction, and it is marked as a subordinating conjunction in our current SPAG marking schemes. So we just need to be really careful about, look, it's not incorrect in terms of the real world. If you look in many blogs and many resources, they will still use some of those terms like fanboys. But it meant that a lot of children who've been taught that actually missed out on an easy mark in the papers that have marked so as a subordinating conjunction. So down in Cornwall, we always teach our coordinating conjunctions as those three words, and, but, and, or, and they have three jobs. So the first job is that they can join words together. So for example, bread and butter. In the sentence, I like bread and butter. So they can join words together in a sentence. They can also join phrases together in a sentence. So for example, all the king's horses and all the king's men. So there's two jobs. And the third job is the important job, they join clauses together. And this is what we want our year 2 children to be able to do to achieve that at expected level in their writing. So to be able to join clauses together using and, but, or all. So that's one of those bullet points on that at expected level. And clauses, so clause, we won't delve into sentence construction here, but clauses have got to have a subject and a verb. But mostly I say to the children, spot the verb, because sometimes the subject is implied. But traditionally we say a clause has a subject and a verb. But if you can spot the verb, you've got the clause. So it's getting late is a clause. I'm tired is a clause. So it is getting late. So we've got the verb to be there. So we know we've got a clause. It is getting late, or it's getting late. We know it's a clause. We also know it's a main clause because it makes sense on its own. It's independent. And then our second clause, I'm tired, I am tired. So again, we've got that verb to be. We know it's a clause, but we also know it's a main clause because it makes sense on its own. And those two main clauses have been joined using that simple coordinating conjunction. And children use those simple coordinating conjunctions in their early spoken language and in their early writing when they're just starting to join their ideas together. So again, for our year 2 writers, we need to be modeling that for them, particularly joining those two clauses together in spoken language, so that they're able to write that quite fluently and naturally by the time they get to the end of year 2. And then we've got our subordinating conjunctions. So these are the ones that I call big money conjunctions. So they're more sophisticated than and, or, and, but, really. And they're more sophisticated because they help us to express things like cause and effect in a sentence. So we've got some examples here, where, unless, while, before, if, because, although, until, when, so, etc. So there are lots of others, of course. But those subordinating conjunctions help us to explore the interrelationship of ideas in a sentence. They're really important words, actually, for basic communication, and essential because we want our children to be writing using these at the end of year 2 and writing sentences like this. So I cried because my hair was messy. So if we unpick this little sentence here, we've got I cried is our main clause. And then we've got because my hair was messy, which of course is a subordinate clause. And it opens with the subordinating conjunction because. So really important types of sentence. And quite often the DFE are referring to them as multi-clause sentences in government material now, of course. So subordinating conjunctions. And great for varying sentence construction, because of course we could write I cried because my hair was messy, but I could rewrite that as because my hair was messy, I cried. So putting the subordinate clause at the front, which of course we want at Key Stage 2. We want them manipulating sentence construction so that they're varying sentence starts for the reader. So yeah, first-rate writers across the English speaking world regularly begin sentences with conjunctions. And I'm not saying that we should encourage perhaps children in year 1 to be doing it, you know, but if you think about key stage 2, where you've got some good writers who've got that good command and they're doing that for effect, then that's absolutely fine. You know, people quite often say to me, should I start a sentence with but? And isn't that clumsy? Isn't that wrong? But if you think about real authors who use what sentences like, but he was doomed, short sentence starting with but, for impact, for effect. So for our more able writers, you know, think about year 6 doing that for effect. That's absolutely, you know, we would want to encourage that at that stage. Just a note for you guys for in terms of leadership, consistency in the use of terminology. So these are some things that we've picked up on visits to schools, things like inverted commas we need to be using, which is the term from the national curriculum, not speech marks. So, you know, the current curriculum moved away from speech marks. I still hear both. And I think that's okay. You know, if a teacher is saying, okay, can you see the speech marks, the inverted commas here? You know, so that you've not got that obstacle in terms of terminology. If they've currently learnt it, if they learnt it in year 1, 2, or whatever as speech marks, then sort of bridging that gap is quite useful, I think. Coordinating conjunctions, which we've mentioned, and, but, and, or, rather than fanboys, which stands for and, nor, but, or, yet, so. And this next one's important. Adverbs, not time connectives. So this is one that some of our schools are still wrangling with. But certainly a number of years back, a lot of schools were teaching time connectives. So the words like first, next, finally, you know, after that, those sorts of phrases as well. So the words that you use to get that cohesion in your writing, that flow in the writing, and put your writing in order. So really useful for instructional writing, really useful for early story writing too. We used to refer to those as time connectives, but they need now to be introduced. If you're using the curriculum and you're concerned about SPAG and the end of key stage tests in the UK, then we need to refer to those as adverbs of time, essentially. So they're hearing that term adverb rather than connective. Connective is not in the curriculum at all. And the other one is relative clause. So relative clause comes into our curriculum in year 5. And our children need to know, so our year 5 teachers need to be introducing relative clauses as one type of subordinate clause. Because in our test in the UK, they are sometimes asked to recognise it as relative and sometimes asked to recognise it as subordinate. So a relative clause is one type of subordinate clause. So let me think, the teacher who was exhausted cried, for example, that sort of construct, you know, that relative clause. Now, we used to I have many schools that I work with who used to call that an embedded clause or a dropped in clause, which is nice terminology, but it's not tested and it's not in the curriculum. So I'd be avoiding embedded and I'd be avoiding dropped in clause essentially. Now, here, this comes from the handbook, Ofsted's handbook. So in the Ofsted Inspection Handbook, it says, in evaluating the implementation of the curriculum, the inspectors would primarily evaluate how curriculum is taught at subject and classroom level. Teachers have expert knowledge of the subjects they teach. If they do not, they are supported to address gaps in their knowledge so that pupils are not disadvantaged by ineffective teaching. So we know there is a link between subject knowledge, teacher subject knowledge, and standards in the classroom. So, and it says here about how leaders, you know, it is really about how leaders support teachers and teaching assistants with that expert knowledge. And it's some of that grammar stuff is quite hard, particularly if you're looking at Key Stage 2 expectation. So things to support you guys, to support your teachers. This is really good. This is Essential Primary Grammar, which came from Deborah Myhill, who did the research at Exeter University into grammar. So some really good support for teaching there. Things like little contextualized examples for children for teaching grammar. But also, I really like these for the classroom. By the way, we're not on commission for any of these resources. All we do is promote stuff we really like. So if I was on commission for all of these resources, I'd probably be a billionaire by now, which would be really lovely. So Oxford Primary Grammar, Punctuation and Spelling. The turquoise one is a really good one for Key Stage 1. Then say Year 1, really. And then the green one is designed for across primary. And then the dark blue is designed for Key Stage 3. But I definitely advocate having one of those in Year 6. I think it's useful to have that in Year 6. If you haven't come across this one, Grammasaurus, the Ultimate Guide. We really like these. The Ultimate Guide to Teaching Non-Fiction Writing, Spelling, Punctuation and Grammar. So the one on the left is Key Stage 1, which has only just come out, and the one on the right is Key Stage 2. And what they have in them, they have non-fiction text examples or models. You have a printable version, but then you also have an annotated version, which is quite nice. So they've picked out all the grammar, essentially, which is, yeah, really good, I think. From the inspection framework, again, they say if curriculum lies at the heart of education and subject lies at the heart of curriculum, it follows that teachers need solid knowledge and understanding of the subjects they teach. So we've also got, if you are interested, we have live Zoom training, grammar subject knowledge Zoom training. And currently that is on a 2-for-1 offer. I think it's something like £65 for 2 people, but you can train your whole school for £100. So I don't know if you've seen any of those on our websites. We have 12 different sessions, all English based, and they are £100. So you can join a session like this with all your staff, all your teachers, all your teaching assistants, and it's only £100. But we're also doing an unlimited offer. So you can book all your teachers and all your teaching assistants onto any of our 12 English training events, our whole school training events, for £499. So we've got things like reciprocal reading, fluency, grammar subject knowledge, grammar games, inference. There's a whole host of them. So if you're interested in that, then do drop me a line or have a look on our website at the information, because it's an absolute bargain. So you could split your bookings as well, so you can have, I know it's really difficult sometimes for schools to send teaching assistants after school, for example. So what we've said is that teaching assistants can be booked onto a session in the day, and teachers can come in the evening, or say Sophie can't come from Year 3, well, she could be booked onto the next date. So there's real flexibility in it for schools, because that's one of the things that we found. It's been really, really hard for schools to come on training recently. So we're trying to make that as accessible as possible. So, and we are about to do some recordings, professional recordings of these sessions as well. So they'll be available on our website soon too. So we've got a grammar subject knowledge session. So it's 2-for-1, or you can book it as a £100 whole staff, but it's also free for NQTs and ECTs. So if you only want your NQTs and ECTs to come, they can come for free. So the link is there. I also run a whole day on grammar. So that's for Year 2 to Year 6. And that's looking at, well, actually the slide's there. It's looking at everything. So it's looking at contextualized grammar. It's looking at subject knowledge. It's looking at how to construct a lesson, games and activities. So that's all the little bits of grammar actually packed into a whole day. So that's on a 2-for-1 offer too, but it's on for a limited time. It's half price. So there's a code there for you guys. That means essentially 2 people for £89.50 for the day, which is a bargain. It's a very good day. That there's also for leaders, just thinking about making sure that Year 6 teachers are familiarising children with the terminology of the test. Now, I hate the idea of teaching to the test. However, it's the hoop we have to jump through. And actually, sometimes it isn't that children don't know the answers in terms of the grammar. Sometimes it's the language of the test that actually gets in the way. So for example, here, what is the grammatical term for the underlined words in the sentence below? Now in class, I would say there, so if I was teaching, I would just say, what do we call the words underlined, for example? So we need, we need year 6, not to train them up in terms of, but to give them their best shot at showing what they know at that end of Key Stage 2 test. So we really advocate just in our day-to-day talk with the children, when we're doing a practice question on the board, just making sure that we're varying the language of the question. So, what is the grammatical term? Brilliant. Let's use that, that question starter to help us with our questioning in the classroom. And the answer to that one, of course, is a noun phrase, or actually they accepted 3 different answers here. They accepted noun phrase, expanded noun phrase, and extended noun phrase. So they got a point, even they got a mark if they used any of those answers. Okay, I realise I'm going 10 to the dozen, but that's good. So we'll have some time for questions at the end too. So here it says, don't let the language of the test get in the way. So I've just put some, some question starters here, which I think is what I do as year 6 is just make sure that we look at the test every year and pick out some of those sort of trickier question starts. So we do a variety of these. Tick one word to complete the sentence below. Circle the word. Which sentence uses correctly? Draw lines to match each sentence to its type, basically. Copy the sentence below. Add whatever punctuation where necessary. Write a command using the word look. The sentence below has a something missing. Explain why it needs a something. Why is the adverb used in the sentence below? So, just varying that, the way in which we ask questions, I think is really important. When it comes to principles, the other thing that arose from the research was the importance of contextualizing grammar teaching, and wherever possible, using authentic examples. Now, it's not always possible. Sometimes I write examples to share with the children. And, sometimes I'll go for published schemes, but wherever possible, using an authentic example and talking about the grammar and the impact on writing. So grammar for writing. So explicit grammar teaching that draws attention to the linguistic choices and possibilities available rather than just a focus on concepts and terminology. So contextualized grammar teaching, Exeter University say, makes a difference in terms of transfer into the writing eventually. And of course, that's what we want ultimately, not just to tick the test, essentially. So Exeter University talk about lead pedagogical principles when it comes to the teaching of grammar. They say make links, so links between the grammar and how it works in writing. Give the children examples, not lengthy explanations, which can be quite abstract for children, but give them examples, lots of them. Use authentic text wherever possible, and build in high quality discussion. And I think this is the thing that is probably the biggest barrier to impact and effective teaching, is that it's the subject knowledge and having the confidence in the subject knowledge and terminology to be able to use it quite naturally when we're talking about our texts and when we're doing our shared writing. So when I'm doing a shared writing, having the confidence to say, actually, I'm going to move the subordinate clause to the front there because it varies the sentence construction. Otherwise, we've got, so we're talking about the impact on the reader, but we're using the correct terminology. So we'd say, I'm going to use the subjunctive form of the verb here because, this is a formal piece of writing. So I'm going to say, if I were instead of if I was. So that's, for me, that's the crux of it, really, is that building in that high quality discussion about grammar and its effect on the reader, really. So to do that, it's, you know, it's about having the confidence really with that subject knowledge and that terminology. And, you know, with the best will in the world, not all primary school teachers are or feel like experts in English. And, you know, I would never profess to be an expert in maths. And it's one of those things that it's it's hard. It is hard for some of our teachers. So it's about giving them as much support as you possibly can, really. Some of those books are really good, and just about giving them the confidence to talk to each other and to talk to you guys too, I think is really important. Let's have a look at a sentence here. So this is the sort of thing that Exeter University talk about when they talk about contextualized examples. So have a look at this and tell me what's the effect. This is a piece of part of a description of a crypt. Tell me what you think, folks. What's the effect of this? How does it make us feel?
I think it builds the atmosphere of kind of gloominess and not wanting to be there.
Yeah, lovely. Thank you. So gloominess, lovely. Quite often people say gloomy, you know, thinking about it being quite spooky or mysterious or yeah. So and tell me, how did the author do that? What choices has the author made there? Cobwebs shivered. Yeah,
shivered
brilliant.
And piercing.
Definitely. So those powerful verbs, shivered, you know, and piercing. It's quite a strong. That's a really powerful verb, isn't it? So the choice of verbs, the specific choice of nouns too. So cobwebs, you know, moonlight, gloom. So specific vocabulary choice. Now, sometimes for the children, I'll replace words. So instead of saying, you know, using the powerful verb shivered, what about if I changed it and put danced? Cobwebs danced in a shaft. I mean, does that change the impacts immediately? So children really get used to that. So really can see that. It makes it very tangible for them, actually. So I would definitely encourage teachers and teaching assistants to be playing around with language like that and replacing vocabulary and changing sentence construction and talking about the impact on the reader. It's interesting because most people say that is gloomy and it's mysterious and it's spooky, but someone, well, a couple of people actually have said to me, actually, that sentence, it feels like it's somewhere full of hope, which is quite interesting. And here, and they said it, and the hope comes from the fact that it's gloomy, but the moonlight is piercing the gloom. So there's this shaft of moonlight coming through and piercing the gloom. So there's light at the end of the tunnel, sort of thing. So, and I think that again is really important for our classrooms when we're discussing texts with the children, to encourage them to have a difference of opinion. So some people might read this and say it's gloomy, it's mysterious, it's spooky. Some people might say actually it's full of hope, this sentence. And we want to encourage that with our children. We want them, I think it's year 6. The year 6 objective in reading objective is to challenge each other's views courteously. What a lovely objective, if you can have such a thing. And we want that right from reception to year 6, to challenge each other's views courteously. As long as we're asking them, well, what made you think that? You know, what's your evidence there? That's what we want. The other tip that comes from the research is to verbalise the link between grammar and effect. So instead of our learning objectives in the classroom saying things like, we're learning what an expanded noun phrase is. We don't want that sort of objective. We want objectives that say things like, we're helping our reader visualise the setting by using expanded noun phrases. So it's about the outcome in terms of writing. It's about making that link into the writing for the children. It's not grammar for grammar's sake, really. It's grammar and our understanding of grammar that is going to support us to make us better writers, essentially. And as leaders, if you're doing things like monitoring the teaching of grammar across school, then you want to hear that terminology used during shared writing, as I mentioned earlier. So when teachers are sharing with children, modeling and demonstrating, you know, we've got our flip chart here, and I've got my class here on the carpet with me, perhaps at Key Stage 1, they might be at their tables, that's absolutely fine, but everyone can see on my flip chart, and I'm writing in front of the children, and I'm thinking aloud all the decisions that they have to make when they sit down and write independently. That's teaching demonstration. That is such a powerful way of teaching. We're seeing an expert writer, essentially, thinking aloud and talking aloud the decisions, you know, in terms of composition. And using the terminology within that think aloud. So that's really important. So teacher demonstration, 3 techniques that I see within shared writing that are all pretty successful, really. The first one's teacher modeling, teacher demonstration. The second one is teacher scribing. So that's just where you stop and you hand it over to the children for a bit. Say, right, guys, I need help with this second sentence here, or this third sentence here. I need to describe this character. She's moving along the prom. I want to show that she's not feeling very well. Any suggestions? Turn to your partner, write it on a whiteboard, you know, so and it gives the teacher a breather, but it just engages the children again. And then you ask them to share with you, so they hold up their whiteboards, or they give you suggestions, and you give them that opportunity, you give them that feedback. Oh, I like that idea. I wonder if you could strengthen the verb a bit more, or, you know, that sort of thing. I'm going to choose that example. That's great, that's spot on. I might edit it a bit and explain why, and then I've scribed. So that's teacher scribing. So you're involving the kids a bit. Supported compositions, where you say, right, guys, phew, we've done a paragraph together. Now I want you to write the next paragraph. I mean, it depends on the year group, but it could just be like, you know, right, year 2, I want you to write the next paragraph here. You're going to write this paragraph, and I'm, you know, for our joint composition, our shared story here together. Remember, whatever the focus is. So supported composition, they go away, they have a little go, and then we come back together again, and we give them feedback on what they've written so far. And that's really powerful, because that's feedback at the point of composition. We're not waiting to mark their books and they come in the next day and they've done all sorts of things. It's meaningless sometimes. You know, there's too much of a gap between the writing and the children getting the feedback to make a difference to their writing. But if they're doing little bits of writing and you're giving them feedback at that point of composition, not only are you impacting on that child's writing, but also you're, you know, everyone's learning from that, which is really powerful. And shared writing, this is Pi Corbett, who I'm sure you know and heard of, seen talk, I'm sure. Seen him a number of times in my career, and he's I always learn something new. He says shared writing is the main way in which writing is taught. If teachers are not doing shared writing, they're not teaching writing. And I would say prepare your text. So, you know, it's easier at Key Stage 1, but at Key Stage 2, I would definitely I'd have my, you know, my script there for shared writing, because then that focuses my attention in terms of what I want to model for the children. And talk. We're really making it explicit. Pi talks about modeling progress. We are showing the children how to do what we want them to do next, to take their writing on that next step, and that involves modeling all of that grammar stuff that we want them to be able to do in their writing. So important principles. The other aspect for grammar teaching is games and strategies to keep the concepts bubbling over and making it fun, making it memorable. The grammar games are little and often. So if we've looked at something in some detail, you know, in an authentic text, and we've explored it, then we need to come back to that, you know, on a daily basis, because we know that little and often makes a difference, just to keep it bubbling over. And so the games are great for that. And again, Exeter University really support that. Teaching grammar to pupils playfully improves their writing capabilities substantially. So in the best practice of teaching grammar, it needs to be fun. The kids need to be laughing and having fun with language. It's going to be deeper learning for them. So things like this, powerful verb games, for example, really simple activity, but, you know, could get the children working in groups, and they write a collaborative list. So I won't make you guys do it, because you guys are all on your own, but I'll explain the games to you. So here you write a collaborative list. So they might have on their list where they've all written together, eat, gobble, nibble, munch, etc. Okay, and then so that's really important because that's about broadening their vocabulary. They're learning from each other, you know, different words for eat. Brilliant. So breadth of vocabulary is really important, but then it's about depth of vocabulary. So what we want then is in their group, they've got to take it in turns to pop one of the words in their brain and act it out for the rest of the group. So, you know, little Sophie might do this, and then they've got to guess, oh, it's nibbled. Yes, it's nibbled. Brilliant. And then they take it in turns with the other words. So that's about depth of understanding. We want them to have an idea of, well, what is that difference between nibble? What's the difference between nibble and gobble? What does it look like? Because we want them to choose their vocabulary really precisely in their writing, and they won't be able to do that if they can't, you know, if they haven't got the depth of understanding with regards to, you know, synonyms, for example. Little activities like sentence circles. So for this, you give the children a little strip of spelling paper, and I'm sure you've played this before. In a group, what they do is they all have a little strip of spelling paper, and they all write down an adverb at the top of their spelling paper, like the word carefully. Then they fold it over, and they all hand their paper to the left. And then underneath the folds, they all write a determiner. So the, a, am, some, one, etc. And then they fold it over, pass it on. Then they all write an adjective. So they all do it until they get to the bottom noun. And then, of course, when they unravel it, they end up with a really hilarious sentence that makes them laugh. So they end up with something like, you know, carefully the old banana jumped under the crazy elephant, for example. So it's a nice way into editing, because when they read it, it's a nonsense sentence, so they could edit it for sense. Quite often there's an anomaly in terms of, you know, we need to edit it for singular, plural, or agreement of tense or whatever. And it's a good way into editing. It's a good way of revising word classes. And of course you can adapt it. So if I'm in year 2, I might just give them the word the, and then put adjective, noun, verb, full stop. So they could just play it at a simple level. In Key Stage 2, year 6, we might put subordinating conjunctions in there, etc. So it's easy to adapt. They have fun with it, but it's also a good way into poetry. I've seen teachers use this as a springboard into poetry, because the sentences that they come up with are so random. They lend themselves beautifully to nonsense poetry. So it's a really nice way in. This sort of activity, you know, putting a simple sentence up and saying, right, guys, could you drop in a relative clause here? So the teacher, who was excited, screamed, who was exhausted, screamed, etc., etc. So playing little and often games that get the children just manipulating some of that grammar that you've taught in context. Because of course here, relative clauses, they come up all the time in the SPAG test. This one is last year's. It says, complete with a relative clause. My grandma went on holiday to Spain, and they have to add in a relative clause that tells them that the grandma loves traveling. So my grandma, who loves traveling, went on holiday to Spain. So the other activity that I'd encourage, the sort of activity that I'd encourage in the classroom, are activities like word class challenge activities. So here you just get the children, you give the children a sentence, and in that sentence you have words that are repeated. So she rose to pick the red rose, and the children have got to explain why rose number 1 is a verb and why rose number 2 is a noun. This sort of activity is deep learning. You know, this is about children articulating their understanding. It's not, it goes beyond, let's just underline the verb, underline the noun. And I think this sort of thing is really important. On our website, and it might well have been on the link that I sent you with the handout, actually, word class challenge sentences. If you didn't get that, we've got just an A4 sentence examples to do this. So just to start classes off with this. But of course, in Key Stage 2, they can be writing these sorts of sentences for other groups to do in the classroom, which is a really good activity as well. But there, if you haven't got the link to download this, it's on our website under free resources, grammar resources. Oh, this is what I mentioned earlier about training your whole school for £100. So grammar games that work. So we've got grammar games that work and grammar subject knowledge as a train your whole school for £100, or £65 for two. But free for NQTs and free for ECTs with the code ECT888. So do pass that on to your ECTs. Best practice. So a couple of slides that just sort of pull all that together, really. So as leaders thinking about, right, what are we looking for in teaching across primary? So correct use of terminology, of course, lots of examples. So keep to that grammar appendix. If you're using the national curriculum, so if you're a school in the UK using the national curriculum, use that grammar appendix. And I think I did put the link to the grammar appendix on the resources page for this session. Consistency across the school. So if we're using adverbs in, adverbs of time in year one, let's use it all the way through. Teachers talking about the function of language. So we're talking about, well, what job does this word do in the sentence? Yes, that's going to help them in terms of SPAG tests, but more importantly, it's going to give them a better understanding about how words work in a sentence, and that's going to impact on their writing. Teachers make explicit links to the effect in writing and demonstrate the application of grammar in shared writing. Shared writing is the perfect vehicle for supporting that transfer into writing. Use active strategies, games to make learning memorable and keep that bubbling over. So we've done some work on powerful verbs. Then we need to keep coming back to that through games throughout the week, just to keep it bubbling over. And what I would say too is that we need to do that. We need to look back sometimes and keep some of that knowledge bubbling over from the previous year and the previous year. Because of course, when you look at the SPAG test at the end of year 6, there's a massive percentage of questions that are not testing year 6, they're testing the national curriculum in year 2 to 5, and lots of it comes from Key Stage 1 objectives. So we need to keep the Key Stage 1 bubbling over in Key Stage 2. And daily. And we've seen the impact of that when we look at phonics teaching. The revisit review in phonics has made a massive impact on how children are retaining that information in phonics, and it's the same for grammar. Oh, here it is. Year 1 to year 6 curriculum revisited in all year groups. Here is 30% of the questions in the Key Stage 2 test last year were content from year 1, from Key Stage 1. 30% of the questions at the end of year 6 were actually Key Stage 1 national curriculum stuff. So at Key Stage 2, we just need to keep that stuff bubbling over, really. All teachers have got an awareness of the end of Key Stage expectations. I think that's really important. So when we go right back to the beginning of the session, saying the importance of spoken language. So what that means, that bullet point is, if at the end of year 2, we want our children being able to write a because sentence, a while sentence, a when sentence, an if sentence, then we need to be modelling that and talking that in nursery and reception. If whatever we need, there's a delay, isn't there, from spoken language into writing. But if we model it, children naturally imitate. If we model it often enough, if we layer our talk with the sorts of sentences we want our children to use in their writing, they will soak them up and they will start to use them in everyday talk, and eventually they'll come out in their writing. I've seen it work. I've seen it work with my own little girl. It's about modeling it. So if we are deliberate and strategic about that in school, it will raise standards in writing. It works. The focus on spoken language. And that's what that next one is: speaking, listening, and contextualize wherever possible, of course. In year 2 and year 6, so if you're doing SPAG tests, feed in the test type examples alongside games, etc., rather than reams of grammar exercises and worksheets. Grammar exercises and worksheets sometimes turn children off grammar. We want children to be excited about language and to love grammar and to be able to talk about the impact of grammar and how authors use grammar, etc. So yes, we want them to understand the language of the test and the format of the test in year 6, if that's the hoop that we're jumping through, but we can do it by feeding in. We'll play a game, then we'll look at an example from a past paper, perhaps. So we're just feeding it in naturally alongside games and active strategies. And teachers and TAs providing good models in spoken and written language. That's something that's really important, of course, that we are modeling for our children, that we're not modeling incorrect tense, etc., etc. And what are we looking for in terms of impact? This comes from our curriculum audit tools. So if you're not aware of it, we have a curriculum audit tool for each of the aspects of English. And this just comes from the grammar audit tool. Pupils are developing a love of words and language and enjoy manipulating and playing with sentences and punctuation. They're confident with grammatical terminology and use it purposefully to talk about language. That's what we want. We want them using that to talk about their writing and the writing of others. That's what our audit tool looks like, the front cover. So writing curriculum audit tool, grammar, punctuation and vocabulary. So you should have had that on the resource page. I sent a link out with the Zoom link for today, but also the handout link to the resource page. And on that resource page, there should be a curriculum audit tool link to download, as well as the national curriculum bits and bobs. If you haven't got that, again, it's on our website. So on our website, dandelionlearning.co.uk, under resources, free resources, there will be, I think it's 5 curriculum audit tools. So there's one for grammar, one for transcription, one for composition, there's one for reading, and there's one for early reading and phonics. So let your if you've got a reading manager or early phonics and early reading, there's an audit tool. So it's to support school self-evaluation, really, and it's been updated. If you are interested in the Train Your Whole School sessions, have a look on our website. Here it is, dandelionlearning.co.uk/training, or drop us an email. But we've got grammar games that work, spelling games that work, developing growth mindset, focus on fluency, guided writing, teaching vocabulary, teaching RSC, active editing, reciprocal reading, improving inference and guided reading. So we've got all of those sessions running. We've got, I don't know why, but it's not on there. Oh, because we talked about it earlier, we've got grammar subject knowledge as well as a session. So do have a look. And if you're interested in the unlimited package, which gives you access to all of the 12 Train Your Whole School events for £4.99, then just drop us an email and we can organise that for you. Here we've got a link to free training for parents. So helping parents at home learning, getting to grips with grammar. So signpost them to our website to book their places. So we just go through terminology there for parents. So because we know that when parents are engaged in learning, it supports the children, of course. So, and for some of our parents, they want to know, they just need a little bit of support. We also have free training using writing journals. So my colleague Tree runs that. It's about a 45-minute session to an hour session, something like that. And it looks at the use of writing journals. So little books where the children collect great vocabulary through shared reading, shared writing, grammar games. It's somewhere to pop. So real authors have a writing journal. And it's looking, this session is looking at how our schools have set up writing journals or magpie books, etc., to collect that vocabulary to support the transfer into independent writing. I have not seen another strategy that is so effective for supporting transfer into into writing. So it's a really good strategy. It's almost like a personalised working wall, if you like, that writing journal. So if you're interested in finding out more, it's totally free. Tree runs a session on that, and I run a session on using questioning to develop comprehension. So again, that's an hour session, so it's totally free. So share that with all members of staff. And Tree runs one on developing reading for pleasure. So again, share that with everybody, and hopefully they can join a session, staff can join a session. Engaging hard to reach parents. Actually, I am not sure if that one's running currently, but if you're particularly interested in that, then drop us an email. And of course, for leaders, we have Is Your School Ofsted Reading Ready? Now that's a whole day. It's not free. It's a paid course, but it's a whole day for leadership teams. At the moment, it's on unlimited places for your team, and I think it's £179 for the whole day, but you can bring as many people as you like. It's Zoom training. It used to be 2 for 1, but we found that in schools there was quite often a reading manager that wanted to come, a deputy head, an English lead, etc. So we said it's unlimited, so anyone can come from school, as many as you like, for the single price. And please pass this on to your year 2 and year 6 teachers. So we do Key Stage 2 SAT Success, and that's looking at, okay, how do we motivate our children, how do we jump through that hoop, but also get them to be great readers and writers in year 6. And we do a Key Stage 1 version, but it's looking at that expectation at the end of year 2 now. And we also, this is coming up soon, it's More Able, so Achieving Greater Depth. So that's starting to get quite busy, that one. So Achieving Greater Depth, but we do have a couple of dates on at Maximising Progress for More Able. So if that's something that's come up in SATs analysis, etc., then you might want to have a look at the write-up on that. It's, again, you can have a look at the write-up, you can book directly or drop us an email. So there are a couple of choices of dates there. And of course, we run bespoke whole school training too. So via Zoom, because we're based down in Cornwall. So if you're in Cornwall, face-to-face, but we can do. But apart from that, it's normally via Zoom. So unless you want a whole day's training, and then we do travel around the country, but if we can do anything that's on our website, and we make that bespoke for your school. So drop us an email if that's something that we can support you with. And I'm going to end the session on this. So this is from Professor Myhill. She says, it's not just about teaching pupils to use grammar accurately. Accuracy is really important, but it's not sufficient. You can have a really accurate but dull piece of writing. This is about using the language creatively, being able to manipulate grammar for effect, and giving children power over the use of language. That's what we want. That's what we want. Okay, folks, any questions? I've finished a little bit early. Any questions, folks? Any comments or questions? You're okay? Brilliant. Okay, if you think of something later, if you think, oh, I wish I'd asked that, then drop me an email and I'll try and get back to you at ASAP.